we we need to better define violence. You know what I'm saying?
Well, because I was thinking we have to shape this in a mindset of violence today,
Mm-hmm.
and how because the face of violence for Black people today, we have to be honest, is different from when she was doing this interview.
Mm-hmm.
The main face of violence that Black people face in America today are Black people. What's going on, family? I'm just here to remind you that you can get yourself a copy of my new book, On the Shoulders of Giants, Volume 4 of the Caribbean, by visiting my website, www.ontheshoulders1.com, and help support me as I continue on my mission to make sure that my people have our information, even though, there are many people trying to stop us from learning our history. But hey, we can teach ourselves. And one of the tools we can use is my new book, On the Shoulders of Giants, Volume 4, The Caribbean. Remember, visit my website, www.ontheshoulders1.com, to get your copy. And I appreciate your support. Bam. It's
Out of
me. It's Pat. It's Friday. So that can only mean one thing.
what that mean, Mr. Joseph?
That mean it's Breakdown Friday. That's what that mean. And welcome,
What?
welcome, welcome. If this is your first Breakdown Friday, welcome. I'm Joseph Ward. He's Patrick Irvin. And we take clips from our master teachers, leaders from the past, scholars, even leaders now, people who have given us all types of information, which we call puzzle pieces, to answers to the questions or answers to the problems that we have. So we take all this information, we break this information down, not in a manner to act like we smarter than anybody else, but in a manner to help us better understand this information in these relevant times. Why? Because through a conversation with Dr. Runoko Rashidi, he asked, how did we make this information relevant to today? And that's what we're doing. That's what we're attempting to do, make this information relevant to today. So we're taking this information that was already laid out, breaking it down, see if we can understand it, and doing our best to come up with solutions for us in this day and time. So welcome, welcome, welcome. All of our returning viewers, y'all already know we love y'all. Y'all are the reason why we keep going and doing what we do. So let's get down. Let's get into it. Remember, the link to Patrick's book is in the description. Any supporting information, if you want to support On the Shoulders of Giants in any kind of way, that information is in the description. You see my website scrolling at the bottom of the screen, so you check everything out. We're breaking down today Angela Davis in the conversation with a reporter, and they're talking about revolution, and Angela Davis is giving her ideas and thoughts on revolution. And it's not just about revolution, but a revolution and violence. And do revolution and violence go hand in hand? And why is violence so commonplace with revolution? Does violence and revolution have to happen? So let's get into it. But we are going to take the conversation. We're not necessarily going to be staying on the lines of what they're talking about. We're going to take the conversation in a different place, but you're going to see. So put your seatbelt on and let's do this. Hey, Pat,
Yo.
I just wanted to make sure you was there. Let's do this.
How do you get there? Do you get there by confrontation, violence?
Oh, is that the question you were asking?
Yeah.
See, that's another thing. When you talk about a revolution, most people think violence, without realizing that the real content of any kind of revolutionary thrust lies in the principles and the goals that you're striving for, not in the way you reach them.
Stop right there. Come out the gate with the beginning of that answer. It's in the principles. A revolution is not just about violence. It's in the principles and the goals that you set for yourself. But when we think revolution, we automatically think violence. We don't think of revolution in its total sense. So I like that she said that, because for us today listening to that, I think we should be thinking about that in a total sense of what are our morals and what are our goals. Well, we know we don't have morals and goals as a collective. We know that. So let's not even be fantastic about anything. Let's not even continue to lie to ourselves to act like the morals and goals that we have even come up with are going to be for a collective. It's either going to be for yourself or for the small collective that you have with yourself, but not for the majority of the people, because we're just not going to go together. But what are the morals and the goals that we have for, before we even start to think about revolution, just in regular life, what are the morals and the goals that we have set for ourselves in our everyday lives that can even help us get to even think about anything close to revolution? Because I don't think we're in a position to be thinking about revolution, but I love this conversation because, especially as she flows into giving her answer, you will see why we are taking this conversation and making it relevant. But we know that Black America is not ready for revolution. But the pieces that I can take, that I'm taking from this, is how can we create principles for ourselves, foundation for ourselves, but also understanding the society that we exist in. Because she's going to break it down as we go further about the violence in the society that we live in. But before we can, let's for us right now, let's take revolution out of the equation. Let's just think basics, foundation. What are we achieving? What are we trying to achieve? What are we doing? What do we want? What is our overall outcome? Like, have we thought about that? Like, are we just out here to just have an idea of freedom, or do we have a realistic idea of freedom that we're striving for? And if we don't have that, what will it take for us to be able to come up with that realistic idea towards freedom? What you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you said as far as before we start thinking about revolution, let's focus on what are the things that we're fighting for, what are our morals, what are our principles, what are our values, our moral ways, our folk ways, all of those things that go into defining who we are as a people and what we're striving to achieve. So I agree with that. I kind of want to listen to see more of where she goes with it before I give my response on what I think about what she just said specifically, though.
Okay. Well, I've been listening to it, so
I know you have. I know
I've
you
been ready
have.
for this part.
I know.
So,
And for those of you that are watching these, sometimes I come prepared, like I've listened to it beforehand, and sometimes I just like to listen and see what comes up and make it like a true like reaction type thing. This is one of those settings where I wanted it to be like a true reaction type thing.
all right, well, let's go a little further then. But that's what I think. So let's go.
On the other hand, because of the way this society is organized, because of the violence that exists on the surface everywhere, you have to expect that there are going to be such explosions. You have to expect things like that as reactions. If you are a Black person and live in the Black community all your life and walk out on the street every day seeing white policemen surrounding you, when I was living in Los Angeles, for instance, long before the situation in LA ever occurred, I was constantly stopped. No, the police didn't know who I was, but I was a Black woman. And I had a natural, and they, I suppose, thought that I might be a, quote, militant. And when you live under a situation like that constantly, and then you ask me, whether I approve of violence. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense at all. Whether I approve of guns. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. Some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs that were planted by racists. I remember from the time I was very small, I remember the sounds of bombs exploding across the street, our house shaking. I remember my father having to have guns at his disposal at all times because of the fact that at any moment we might expect to be attacked. The man who was at that time in complete control of the city government, his name was Bull Connor, would often get on the radio and make statements like, niggers have moved into a white neighborhood, we better expect some bloodshed tonight. And sure enough, there would be bloodshed. after the 4 young girls who lived, one of them lived next door to me. I was very good friends with the sister of another one. My sister was very good friends with all 3 of them. My mother taught one of them in her class. My mother, in fact, when the bombing occurred, one of the mothers of one.
You're thinking.
Yeah, so I figure I got the gist of what
Mm-hmm.
she was saying
Mm-hmm.
earlier, and she's
Mm-hmm.
off on a tangent now. Which is cool, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's funny because tangents, you know, we love our tangents in the community. I mean, I'm off on one right now. But anyway, let me bring it back. One of the so I agree with the way you assessed it, right? Like, before we get to the step of revolution, we need to be on our morals and values. We need to be figuring out what principles we're going to stand on. But we also have to accept that the way we go about achieving those things are going to be both influenced by and an influence on our principles
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
our morals and our values and those things. So it's not, we can't necessarily divorce the action from the means, you know, the results from the means. Those things are intertwined. But I do think, to go to the core of what the original question was, we need to better define violence. You know what I'm saying?
Well, because I was thinking we have to shape this in a mindset of violence today,
Mm-hmm.
and how, because the face of violence for Black people today, we have to be honest, is different from when she was doing this interview.
Mm-hmm.
The main face of violence that Black people face in America today are Black people.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to be honest, if we have to be honest. So
No, I don't want to be. We have to be honest.
we have to be honest, and Black people are the biggest threat to Black people. So yes, we exist, like she was talking about, existing in a violent environment. We exist in violence, but we exist in violence differently than, and I assume this is in the 1970s. We exist in violence differently than from what Black Americans did in the 1970s, because in 1970s, the main aggressor toward Black people wasn't Black people at that time. The main aggressor towards Black people are us now. Now, we all understand from historical context that whenever Black people, and we keep saying this, whenever Black people get too uppity, white people tend to put us in our place. They tend to check us. And violence is usually that, or some kind of systematic something that ultimately leads to violence. But understanding that we do live in a violent society, but we're going to have to shape our morals and our values differently, because we're going to have to stop being violent toward ourselves before we can be able to defend ourselves or even put together any type of resistance against anybody else, because the face of violence towards Black people in 2022 are Black people.
Yeah, I think, and that's where I go back to, we need to, like, because a lot of the times we use violence in one form of context, and people hear it in another form of context or another system or whatever the case might be. And so in this sense, you know, if we're talking about physical violence, I 100% agree with you. And her, and what you just said, you know, if we're talking about physical violence, if we're talking about economic violence,
It's
you
white
know,
people.
white people are still the main sources of economic violence for Black people in America, as well as social violence, cultural violence. And I mean, cultural violence you could debate between white Americans and Asians.
Yeah. Well, I would put, how about this? Out of all the 9 major areas of human activity that Dr. Nelly Fuller lay out, Black people, we are only the biggest threat to ourselves in the violence category. Everything else is what it normally was, white America or even whites or Asians.
Right. So that's where I go back to, for a conversation like this, if we're talking about a revolution, or a movement, if you will, because I know some people have a problem with the term revolution now. Um, if we're talking about in terms of creating systemic change, you know, can there be systemic change without physical violence? There can be. It's highly unlikely, but
Mhm.
it's possible. But can there be systemic change created without any violence? That's just not going to happen. There's going to be economic violence, political violence, social violence, cultural. There's going to be some kind of violence.
Right.
And so that's where I get into, like, we got to define what, because like you pointed out earlier, the landscape is different
Yeah.
nowadays than it
Yeah.
was back then.
Yeah.
So with the landscape being different, even in terms of the nature of the violence is different. The political violence they were able to enforce because of the political violence they were able to continue because of the reinforcement and the support that they had through physical violence and economic violence is something that they don't have nowadays, because they no longer have that physical violence edge that they had back in the days. Like, they're not just walking down the street punching black
Right.
people in the
Right.
mouth for
Yeah.
trying to vote. Like,
Well,
that's not happening.
well, see, that's one thing I tell black people all the time. Because a lot of people don't believe that the world is not as violent today than it was, say, in 1970. And
Mm-hmm.
we understand that social media is the reason for that, because we can now see the violence. We believe that the world is more violent now.
Mm-hmm.
But the example you just gave is a great one. White people used to just be able to walk down the street and just violate black people and then just keep
Mm-hmm.
walking and nothing happens. They can't do that like that today. We're not saying white people can't do stuff and get away with it. That's not what we're saying. But what we are saying is 2, 3 white men can't just walk down the street, just rough up some black people and just keep walking down the street and not get arrested or
Yeah,
not get some kind of backlash.
yeah. You think about it, right? Because and I agree with you when you say that. I think about it like I think about the peonage system, right? The birth mother of the prison industrial complex, right? In the peonage system, debt slavery, a black person could be walking down the street. A white
Hmm.
person could knock them over the head, drag them
Hmm.
into the courthouse, say they owed them something, and that black person would be sent
Yep. Yep.
to prison to
Gang.
work, right, to work off a debt that they did not own to the state.
The
Slavery,
movie
right?
Life. Look at the movie. The movie
Right.
Life was a great example of the early 1900 peonage system in America. Ray and Claude
Right.
didn't do anything but bump into a black man who got killed. Basically, was in the midst of dying from getting roughed up by white people. Other white people saw them and just automatically assumed, well, y'all got blood on y'all. He's a dead Negro. Y'all 2 Negroes. Y'all going to jail. That the movie Life. That's what Life was about.
Right. And we're not saying that can't happen nowadays, but we are saying it's a lot more difficult for that to happen nowadays. It's
Right.
a lot harder for them to do the things that they used to just do willy-nilly. Racism in a lot of ways is kind of going into this elderly
It's
stage.
evolved. It's
You know, you
evolved.
I like to think about it in terms of a human being. You know what I'm saying? Like, when racism was in its prime, oh, it couldn't be fucked with. Like, like, you think about an athlete in their prime, they just able to dominate the court. But then racism gets older. You think about an athlete getting older, they ain't able to do the same things they were able to do. They're still as effective, but they had to change up their tactics a little bit.
What they racism, like you said, racism don't have to be Achilles now going out there and just chopping people's heads off. Racism is the wealthy, that the literal wealthy elite that run the country. It's kind of like the book The Richest Man in Babylon. Like, I don't need to be the king to be the most powerful, influential person.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm the most powerful, influential. I'm not the king. I'm not in the position of the king, the ruler. But the king understands that I have more influence than he does. Racism.
Right. So I think when we're talking about violence, we have to, at this stage, assess it
Yeah.
differently
Yeah.
than they did back then. And we have to be prepared. Like you hear a lot of black people talking about, because it's still a growing trope. It's been going on for decades now. I beat a white person ass. Yeah, that's cool. But we beyond that in terms of fighting racism. You being able to beat up 5 or 10 white people is not going to do anything to change systemic oppression.
The movie, I'm keep using references because you helping me, but it's helping me make it relevant for myself even more. So the movie Higher Learning, it was one of the main confrontations between Ice Cube, Omar Epps, Busta Rhymes, them, and Remy and the white boys. It's like 5 white boys against 4 black dudes. And the black dudes, they got into a good fight. It was both people got roughed up on both sides, but basically the black dudes beat their ass. And Busta Rhymes and Omar Epps and the rest of those cats, they was celebrating like, yeah, we whooped these crackers. And Ice Cube was like, hey man, one ass whooping won't reverse 400 years of oppression. One ass whooping doesn't mean we're supreme. One ass whooping don't mean we won, right? Like you got to think of that as individual battles. Okay, y'all on the battlefield, and the greatest warrior on our side, yeah, he winning, but overall we losing.
Yeah.
Yeah, think about it in the grand scheme.
And I think one of the biggest, so there's two of the biggest fronts when it comes to change creating violence is economics and politics, right? And the driving force of economic warfare is business.
Yeah.
Businesses are the tools that you use to wage economic warfare. And so you look out at the landscape and it's like, all right, we can beat their ass in terms of physicality. That's one realm, which, there's a lot of debate on that, but a lot of black people seem pretty confident. Whatever, we won't get into that. But okay. But then on the business side of things, when we're looking at the ability to generate, capture, and maintain wealth, primarily in terms of resources for economics, who's winning that? You know what I'm saying?
We not, because we ain't using the playbook. We're not using the playbook. So we not winning that. They winning it because the playbook right here in my hand, but we ain't using it.
So right. And then when we start talking about, okay, what about the cultural war, which is widely raged in terms of education, inculcation. How do you educate your kids? What morals and values are you instilling in the next generation? That's the educational process. How are we doing on that front?
Well, see, I'm glad you're saying that, and that's one of the reasons why I like this clip as well, because when we're thinking about what Angela Davis is talking about and comparing it or bringing it into modern terms, right? Because she's talking about coming from an environment where violence is the norm.
Right. For a lot of us, kinds.
Right. Me and you understand what it's like to live in an environment where violence is the norm. I'm sure we've both been in situations, we've both been in environments where gunshots ring off, gunshots are right in your vicinity, and you don't even move. Like I remember I told the story before, we in the projects, we having a meeting, and they just shooting and ain't nobody move. And I looked at everybody and said, y'all know something wrong with us. Something that we are, I'm not saying we're not afraid of violence, but we are used to violence. We grew up in environments where violence is the norm. She's talking about growing up in an environment where violence is the norm, but it's not the norm the same way it was the norm for us. For us, the face of violence was just like us, looked just like us. For her, the face of violence were white people.
Right. And go ahead, I'm sorry.
And my bad. She was getting into explaining the bombing in Birmingham, Alabama, in the church, and the 4 girls that got blew up in the church. And see, that's the type of violence that they were experiencing from white people coming in and like totally obliterating communities and stuff. That's totally different from like the Crips and Bloods and the gangster stuff that we've been experiencing. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I am saying it's different because it has a different psychological effect when you see that the aggressor or the person who's inflicting the violence is your oppressor versus the person who's inflicting the violence is the same people as you.
Right. And so with that, we because I wanted what drew me into thinking about all this is that she talked about Bull Connor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was a
Perfect
purveyor.
example.
He was a purveyor of extreme political, social, and cultural violence. And one of the things that I do like about what she's doing is that even the way she's framing the answer to the question, right, is pointing out the physical or the cultural violence that's happening in the very interview. My whole world is violent.
Right.
White people have been exposing me to violence against me at their hands for my entire life.
Yep.
And you have the nerve to ask me if I support using violence in return.
Right.
Think about
Right.
like how that whole situation is casted, how the perception, the propaganda that's being used at play there. All of these are forms of violence that we could say she's pointing this stuff out and using examples and it might seem like she's rambling or not answering the question. She is on a bit of a tangent at various points, but the fact remains that she's pointing all of these things out as she talks. And all of that is pointing out, more examples of violence that isn't necessarily, physical violence, but it's still forces that are disrupting the norm or that are causing people to look at things in a certain way that's less than positive, that's going to disrupt progress for those people.
Right. Which is totally different than just having to exist around Pookie and Ray Ray and them down the street.
True.
System like real true systematic violence, like what happened in Wilmington, North Carolina, like also what happened in Black Wall Street, like real violence, like what happened in Move in Chicago, like real violence. But once again, that's why it's very, very, very important for us to have some type of organization, some type of unity. No, not let me restate that. Not some type. We have to have strict organization, strict unity. We have to have a strict foundation. We have to have our shit together. Not to even think about revolution, but to even think about just existing as a united and a competent group of people who can produce for ourselves. Because we have to be able to produce for ourselves, but we also have to, within that mix, learn to defend ourselves, because from history, we know what's coming if we get our stuff together. We know what's coming once we start to build. We already know that because we are behind enemy lines. But even let's just say we start to build on something now that's not competent enough to even be able to stand up to any type of pushback that we would get from white people. We already know it's gonna fall, and it's gonna fall fast. But before we, like we keep saying, before we even think about revolution, though, we have to think about just community. Like, can we get a neighborhood to function? Can we get like a real community to function to where we can at least like have a grocery store in that community, and that grocery store is stocked with things that we could produce for ourselves? Can we have convenience stores in our community? Our own schools that we control in our community, like so the basic things that we need in our community, a clinic, a hospital in our community, a fire station, like things that we control. We can start that to be able to produce like our own currency. We're not like creating our own currency, but have our own economy flowing within that community. If we can start there, we'll be on the right path to doing something better than what we already doing now. Yeah, but let's I want to let this last part play, so then we can get back to it.
One of the young girls called my mother and said, can you take me down to the church to pick up Carol? We heard about the bombing, and I don't have my car. And they went down, and what did they find? They found limbs and heads strewn all over the place. And then after that, in my neighborhood, all of the men organized themselves into an armed patrol. They had to take their guns and patrol our community every night because they did not want that to happen again. I mean, that's why when someone asks me about violence, I just find it incredible. What it means is that the person who's asking that question has absolutely no idea what black people have gone through, what black people have experienced in this country since the time the first black person was kidnapped from the shores of Africa.
Straight up. They don't understand our
Mm-hmm.
experience. I would like Dr. Claude Anderson always talks about how unique our experience is and how we need to understand the uniqueness of our experience, and the remedy to that has to be able to fit the unique circumstances that we've experienced here in America. No other group of people in America have experienced what we've experienced pre-slavery, during slavery, post-slavery. No other group of people. We can't really, we can use examples, but we can't really compare ourselves to other people because of the hurdles that we've had to face. Other groups of people didn't have to face those hurdles. But the fact that we, as like Patrick always saying, our greatest superpower is our adaptability and our survivability. No other group of people have that. No other group of people have the adaptability and the survivability that Black Americans have. But like Patrick also says, it can also be a weakness, and it is a weakness which is used against us, and that's what the colonizers used against us to colonize us, because they know that we have this survivability, so we will do what we need to do to survive at all costs, even being subjugated. So that goes back to what Dr. Anderson was saying, understanding the uniqueness of our experience as Black people here in America. We have to be what word I want to use? Intentional. We have to be intentional about creating specific and proper remedies for moving forward and things that we want to do. What you say?
No, I agree with that. I think one of the problems we have is that we're so desperate to be connected to other people, because if we're being honest about it, the Black experience in America is a lonely experience.
It is.
And that loneliness, although it's cultural and collective in its nature, it affects us on an individual level.
Mhm.
And a lot of that is because we feel so isolated from the rest of the world, because we do have an experience that when we think about it, we recognize the uniqueness of it, but that uniqueness isn't seen as a positive attribute or a thing of strength. It's seen as a weakness or something that isolates us, which is why you start hearing people saying things like Black people are more than just slavery. Black history is this, Black
Mhm.
history, trying to incorporate all of these other things into our experience so
Mhm.
that we can share this existence with another group of people. Even when we see another group of people going through something similar to what we've gone through, there's this need as a collective to latch onto them and embrace them. You know what I'm saying? We see this when you hear the Black people talking about, sorry about that. We see this when you hear the Black people talking about whenever there's a issue with the LGBT community coming up, or an issue with Hispanics and immigration coming up, and all these other things. You hear people all over the media saying, as a Black person, we should know better than anybody else what it's like to be treated like this.
We got to stop doing that.
Right.
We got to stop trying to be a part of everybody else's misery. Like, no, just because they're going through that don't mean we got to share that with them. No, we don't owe anybody a damn thing. And I'm gonna look in the camera deep and I'm gonna say it again. Black people in America don't owe anybody around the world, anywhere inside or outside of America, a damn thing. We don't have to share in the misery or the suffering of anybody else, because we got our own stuff that nobody wants to be a part of, because we all know everybody want to be Black until it's time to be Black. So
Right.
damn that.
But that it goes back into this concept that like you just said, everybody wants to be the cool parts of being Black, including Black people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But when it's time to deal with the downsides of being Black, they're looking for help. And I think that a lot of that is the failure to acknowledge the uniqueness of our experience and using that as something to tie us together and make a, I mean, we have one of the most uniquely powerful histories in the world. Even in that we are nowadays a people, Black Americans are, with a few exceptions, the only living culture group without a land to call their own, that
Yeah.
has never had a land to call their own on the place that they currently reside.
Yeah, and we're actually thriving a lot better than what we're supposed to be.
Right.
Being the condition that you just said. So think about this. We're a cultural group who have never had a land of our own, and we've only experienced violence and turmoil. But yet, when it comes to Black nations, we're like the leading Black nation in the world. If we aggregate everything together, if we actually chose to work together, we'll be like the leading Black nation in the world. We'll be like one of the richest. Black America would be one of the wealthiest nations in the world if we actually aggregate our stuff and work together. So think about all of that is happening. We managed to do that despite all of the sickness and terrorism that we've managed to experience since we got here. Because that's one of the main things that I want to draw out of this is us better understanding our experience, taking more time to think about our experience. So when we look for remedies, not just a diagnosis, not just a treatment, but actual remedies and cures to what's going on to us, we have to really put it in real context, like Pat just said. We've experienced We've experienced some of the worst atrocities that human beings can ever experience. And we're still on the land that we experienced that, but we have made the strides that we've made. So it's something about us. Like I do agree with the historians when they say it's something about us, but it can't just stay there. We have to act on that something about us because it's like being the athlete in the community that everybody know you the best, but your ass ain't never on the team. So nobody's ever really seen your talent. Your talent hasn't really helped the school or the community, anything, because it's never been used. We can't be that person. We can't be the ones who recognize that, yeah, we got the sauce. We got all that. But it doesn't matter to just say that and to just know we have the sauce. We got to use it. We got to put the stuff into action. And that's one of the main things that we're doing with this is making sure that we put this stuff into action.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too is just being able to, because a lot of and I think as a cultural collective we have some maturing to do.
Yeah, we do.
Um,
Not just some, a lot.
right, because a part of the maturation process is being able to accept that other people have unique attributes, qualities, and historical situations going on as well. That doesn't mean that we can't have our own and celebrate our own. Like, you know what I'm saying? And when I say that, I'm thinking about, um, well, maybe we don't want to get into that, but there are a lot of people grasping at a lot of straws. And anytime you see one person, one culture group getting a chance to stand up and say, we are this culture group, without fail, you'll have a Black group. And it's usually more than one person standing up and saying, well, what about us? Well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, what
Well, what
about this?
about you? They don't have to think about us.
Right. And so I think when you say, and when she said Black people are white people are people that ask this question don't have any idea of what's happened to them. Well, that goes back to what's happened to Black people. That goes back to the discussion we had last week when we were talking about, strong people don't have to make statements like I am not a
Right,
monolith.
right,
Powerful
right,
people, right? Powerful people don't have to worry about people not understanding what they've gone through.
right.
But we have to worry about that. And we also have to worry about that because we don't even know what we've gone through.
But that's why I keep telling us and trying to explain to us that we also have to understand. That's why learning the psychology of racism and prejudice, I think every Black person should learn Black psychology. Because in learning Black psychology, you'll understand that we continue to look at the world through the lens of oppressed people. And because we look at the world through the lens of oppressed people, we expect the rest of the world to look look out through that same lens, and the rest of the world don't look out through that same lens. The conquerors do not view the world, themselves, or anybody else through the lens of oppressed people, because they are the conquerors. And so because we look at the world through that lens, we really don't understand how people don't see where we coming from. And the thing is, well, why should they? Once again, that's why we go so hard on appealing to people's moral sensibility, because we know how deep moral sensibilities mean to us, and how people can play on our emotions and manipulate our emotions and moralities. Because I mean, that's who Black people are. All other people don't get down like that, and they just don't. So we got to stop looking at the world through our own eyes and expecting the rest of the world to do that. Like they don't have to give an explanation, and you can't make them give an explanation.
Right. And that's why with most of these things, because I agree with you, especially on understanding, not even understanding, just study Black psychology. Like, because everybody's going to walk away with somewhat of a different understanding of it. Now, we're all going to fall in our groups of beliefs, whether that's structural functionalism or conflict theory or whatever case, symbolism, whatever the case might be. But if we can all at least study it, then I think we'll all be in a better place
Yeah.
to have the conversations that we need to have, because just knowing the history without knowing the effects that the history had on the people is meaningless. And that's essentially what is happening in our cultural indoctrination systems nowadays, aka our schools. People are talking about the historical events absent of the psychological and the real sociological clip this part out. Sociological parts of the discussion that means something.
Well, remember when we did the breakdown of Robin Walker, we were talking about looking at the term knowledge of self.
Mm-hmm.
And not just looking at the term knowledge of self, meaning that, and once again, we were not saying Robin Walker was saying anything. We ain't putting no words in Robin Walker's mouth. We ain't saying that, but we were saying that people need to look at knowledge of self as more than just acquiring historical knowledge, because from our experience, we know that when people acquire only historical knowledge, they say, well, now I've acquired knowledge of self, but you've only acquired historical knowledge. There's a lot more that go to it. And like you say, there are 9 areas of human activity. We have to be able to study information in all areas, but the psychological piece is very important. You have to be able to reverse what happened to the mind. And when we don't understand psychologically what happened to us, even just acquiring the historical knowledge don't mean nothing. Once again, go back to Neely Fuller. If you don't understand the system of racism and white supremacy, anything else that you do seek to learn will only confuse you, because you don't have the psychological piece. You just have the historical knowledge. So therefore, your quest of acquiring knowledge of self, you on level 1. That's it. You got a couple more. We got a whole bunch of more levels to go.
Yeah, I would say you're still in the tutorial.
Yeah, I'm right. Because even like, man, I've been studying Black history for 20 years, man, and I'm still learning new stuff every day. You know how much I don't know? And I believe I know a good chunk, but you know how much more I don't know? Like, I've been listening to some of these historians, they just be rattling stuff off. I'm just like, how do you know all that? But that's just one piece, though. That's just one piece. If we don't put it all together, we ain't talking about nothing.
And that's why it's foolish to think that one person or one group can provide all the answers. There's, like, as we begin to because even between you and I, right? Like, we both study history, but we study different components of it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And that's something that was established because we started doing videos around about the same time. Now, obviously, I stopped doing mine, you kept doing yours. But one of the things I noticed was that your videos were at the time centered more on the individual
people and
their stories, and my videos were centered more on the groups and the collectives. And but in that, there's this whole narrative, this whole area where we were able to have conversations
Right.
about the same topic
But
from
different.
totally different vantage points.
Because we're gonna. So me, I'm in the vein of J.A. Rogers. Like, if it wasn't for J.A. Rogers, I probably wouldn't have had none of these ideas, because I loved his presentation and how he was teaching us about the individuals, and then hearing Dr. Clark talk about different individuals and things. So I'm in the vein of that. I want more people to know about the individuals, me specifically. That's my lane. That's the lane that interests me the most out of history, is learning the individual stories. Now, I do like learning about the historical time periods and all the other events and things that happen, but learning about individual stories is what interests me the most. That is my lane. But that's, like I say, that's one thing. But guess what? I still have to read this book. I still have to read this book, right? Because just knowing, okay, I know about Reginald F. Lewis, the first black billionaire in American history. If you didn't know, Reginald F. Lewis, the first black billionaire in American history. I know about Reginald Lewis, but it can't just stop there. He was a black billionaire. So how do I become Reginald Lewis? That's the next step. Once I learned about it, how do I become Reginald Lewis? How do I make some of the achievements and strive that Reginald Lewis has made? How do I take some pieces and aspects from his life and incorporate that into my life? Up, 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 up. Here's the playbook again. Up, up. You got to be quicker than that.
But at the same time, it's not just about, because you have to understand, like you said, how that person was both shaped by and shaped the time period that they were in.
Right. You have to put it in the context of that time
Right.
period.
And that's a whole other piece of the puzzle. I could be giving a lecture about a particular time period or a particular culture group and just be talking generalities, and then have somebody like Joe come behind me with specific people and specific instances and specific events and things of that nature that just drive it home. Even when we're talking about creating change on a social level, on a cultural level, right? You need those people that know the individual stories, because those are the stories that galvanize people. Those are the stories that create energy, that create emotion, that create that force. But the people that know the context of everything and can put it all together, those are the people that tend to come up with the strategies that are going to have long-term impact. You need both. And so that, it goes into that when we're talking about historically understanding what's happened to us, and not just, again, I agree what she said insofar as white people that ask that question don't know. It's like she said, it's like they don't know what's happened to us. We said they don't. We take it a step further and said they don't care. They're not going to.
They don't have to know.
So once you embrace that, that opens up a whole new lane, because now you realize all this time that I've wasted trying to get white people to understand something that they just they don't care about understanding.
Bruh, I don't understand the black people who take the time out of their lives to write open letters and make open messages to white people. Dear white people, stop doing this. And dear white people, we don't like that you're doing that. And like, why you think people still writing those letters and doing those type of things to this day? Tell me the first time it worked. Tell me why white people have to care that you took the time out of your life to write this letter to try to appeal to their moralities. Has anything changed? Has anything gotten better from doing that? Stop doing pointless stuff.
My opinion on that is you're either clout chasing, in which case you're disingenuous, or it's a purely emotional response. You're looking for some sort of release, and there is no long-term goal to create change. It's just an act that benefits you, and you understand that, but you need to do it. But I mean, that when I just, again, to go back to the video, if we're talking about violence, we need to understand that there's going to be violence. We need to prepare for it, and we need to understand what that violence is going to look like on all levels. But we also need to understand that even in engaging in interviews like this one, you're still going to be engaging in a
in
type
that
of
form of
warfare,
violence.
in
Yeah.
a form of violence. So you need to be prepared for that. Even the discussions about violence are a form of cultural violence if they're somebody from the dominant culture interacting with somebody from a minority culture, and the person from the minority culture is dealing with these types of questions and these types of suggestions and insinuations.
One of the greatest, I would say, some of the greatest types of violence that we are facing as Black Americans in 2022. Of course, we know economic violence, um, cultural and image violence. We don't control the culture and we don't control our image. And our culture and our image is constantly being stepped on and reshaped and redefined, not by us, but by the people who control it, non-Black people. Um, our health, like violence in the health realm, like a lot of that is self-inflicted, but a lot of that is the systematic and the trash healthcare system. Education, we know the American education system is trash, but my pet peeve with Black people is we keep complaining about how trash the American education system is, but you continue to put yourselves in situations to where when you do have children, that you have to put your children in the education system that you keep talking shit about. So that don't make no sense.
I'm be honest on that one real quick. Being a homeschooler, I homeschool my children. There is no requirement. Now, I'll say this: homeschooling children is a lot more involved than just putting them on the bus to go to school. But when you do decide to homeschool your children, you can do lessons whenever. So if you got to work a full-time job and come home and teach your kids, that's what you got to do. But that this idea or this notion that I can't homeschool my kids because I got to work or I got this going on or I got that going on, like that's all of that's bullshit. But anyways, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But well, I mean, you're a single parent, I'm not, so you can say that. So, but but
Well, I'm not a single parent. I'm married. I was a single
well,
parent.
you know what I mean. But you're a parent basically, but you were a single parent. You did
Yeah.
go through all that as a single parent. Um, Sex is another realm of violence that we experience. The over sexualization of Black people. Once again, this is another area where it's partly our fault and part of the systematic roots of it. And those are the main realms I would say to come off the top of my head, just off the top of my head, that I could say greatly impact Black people. So even now, but it make more sense when you hear a lot of people saying we're at war. They're not talking about physical combat. They're talking about different aspects within the different realms that I've named and beyond those realms as well. So just thinking about how much violence we consume. Matter of fact, do this. Do a violence fast. Take a week and do a violence fast. Like, take a week and eliminate everything from your life that you consume that has violence in it, and record the amount of things that you had to eliminate from your life that you consume and what percentage of that was violent. Just do that. I've did that before, and about 70% of the stuff that I was consuming as far as entertainment, music, and just stuff that I was taking in was violence. About 70%. We live, eat, sleep, breathe violence, and many different forms and shapes and capacities and things here. So with that being said, that's a challenge that we have, or that's a barrier or a hill that we have to overcome. So how do we overcome it? Because it's gonna be there whether we like it or not. So how are we gonna overcome it? But taking the answers that our ancestors has given, our predecessors have given, i.e., like this, and using them, like read the book, use it, implement the stuff. But going back to what I was saying earlier, like working on ourselves, making sure that we're taking the time to fix ourselves. But hell, just build a community. Start with building a community that you in. Just start there. But understand what has happened to us, understand why it has happened to us, and understand that these other group of people don't give a damn about what we think, and about what we care about, because they're gonna do what they need to do to maintain that system of dominance. So yeah. And that's all I got to say about that. Hey man, Breakdown Friday in full effect. That's how we do it. www.ontheshoulders1.com. Thank you, the brother Shabazz. Shabazz, thank you for the contribution. I appreciate you for the continuous contribution. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate it. I really appreciate it. Shout out, hold up. I got a new patron. I got to shout out my patron. I got to do that because I wouldn't feel right if I don't shout out my new patron. What is my phone doing? Don't do that. Don't do that. You know, when the phone be messing up sometimes. I'm on here looking like an old man. Jerome Bigby, my new patron, Jerome Bigby. Shout out to you. I appreciate you, my brother. If you're watching, I sent you a message and I replied to you with links to download the PDF copies of the book, my book, Volume 1, North America, On the Shoulders of Giants. So make sure you check that out. But thank you to Jerome Bigby for becoming a patron and everybody who support On the Shoulders of Giants. That's how we do it. One time for the brother Patrick Irvin. I got to point in the right direction. One time for you. Appreciate you rocking with your homie. And y'all know that's how we do it, man. Let's keep it black. Let's keep it tight. Let's be realistic about where we at in the world, and let's fix this situation. Get our life together. Be the greatest version of ourselves, so our children and our children's children, our children can have a better chance than we had. Hey, two things in the air like a player. We up out of here.